Hello, this is Michael McKibben from Americans for Innovation, and I'm here with Douglas Gabriel, the one of the geniuses behind American Intelligence Media. And we're turning the tables on Douglas today because I have heard him refer to something many times since I've gotten to know them called the cube. And I'll have to be honest with you, I'm an engineer, so I like to understand things. And I know enough about Douglas and Tyler now to know that they're very credible people. But every time I hear them go off on the cube, I begin to wonder. And so therefore, I'm going to ask Douglas to keep it real and ask him if he would explain this cube so that mere mortals could understand it. So let me start this by saying, Douglas, what I hear you describing about radio waves and electromagnetic frequencies and the way we're bathed in all of this electromagnetic infrastructure that exists on our planet, which, as you say, a lot of it's not good for us. The image I get in my mind is where I take a handful of pebbles and I toss them into the water, and I see all these concentric circles start running into each other. And to me, that seems to me what you're describing. Is that too way off? And beyond that, I'm going to ask you to help us by starting your analogy with something I know we all understand because we all see these radio antennas from the different stations where we listen to the radio, where they've got this big, tall tower, and at the top of this, it's broadcasting something we can't see. But we all know that it goes out in concentric circles from that antenna, and we can all pick up radio signals for a specific AM or FM or shortwave frequency. So would you start there with this concept of the cube and help us understand what you're talking about?
Michael, it's absolute pleasure to have a conversation with you about this, but we're going to get very deep very quickly. So I may need to frame how it is that I happen to know some of these things. But to go back to your analogy of the pebbles being thrown into the pond, yes, but that the pond is two-dimensional in the way that the waves ripple, and you would have to throw about 7 billion pebbles at one time to see all the waves going through you. But they're going through you in a three-dimensional fashion.
Are you being figurative or literal?
No, literal.
7 billion?
Yes.
Wow.
That's pretty standard in any place in America. You have literally billions of electromagnetic frequencies going through you because everybody's cell phone, think of all the cell phones in one area that happen to be going through that cell phone tower that is beeping over there. So, to answer your questions, this is very, very complicated. Most people don't really know this. I happen to have a degree in radio broadcasting that I earned when I was in the National Security Agency. When I was drafted way back when, in the days when there was a lottery draft, and I chose to go into the signals intelligence, and I worked in cryptology, but I also worked with antennas. And so I got a chance by experimentation, because that's what we did in the military. If we had an idea, we just tried it out, see if it blew something up. If it didn't, then, we'd keep trying and we'd work on it. So I happened to notice that you could collapse an array antenna. I worked with huge, an array antenna is like a field of antennas where they're all connected. Gigantic shapes and geometric shapes. And
Can you
blah,
give
blah,
us
blah.
an example? Have we seen one of these things? These array antennas you're talking about?
HARP. If you've ever seen the way that HARP array looks?
No, I haven't. I have no idea.
Well, those are the rays that the National Security Agency uses. Where would you see these?
Well,
every once in a while you'll see them.
Down in Cincinnati, there was this whole area north of Cincinnati that had all these towers, and these towers were strung together with wires.
That's it.
And we were told that these were some type of frequency.
Yeah, those are field antennas, field array antennas. And those, they look just like cords, hanging in different shapes. The ones I think I know the ones you're speaking of. And yes, they are connected also to omni antennas. So when you have one of the big antennas you're talking about at the top, it rays out in all directions. When you have a field array antenna, you can capture all kinds of waves, whether they're large or small. The field antenna of HARP, for instance.
What does HARP stand for?
I don't actually remember. What does HARP stand for?
I've seen it referred
high
to.
atmosphere resonance projection or something like that. What
Okay.
originally what they say they were using it for, and the reason it was built up in Alaska is they were trying. It was a high generation antenna projector broadcaster, and they would project this energy into the aurora borealis to see if they could make it light up.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they were doing. They were high atmosphere and ionosphere and all kinds of atmospheric projections to see if they could get that kind of energy going, because they thought that would be a great shield, you see. And so the reason they put chemtrails that are actually specks of metal that rise, many of those heavy metals, when they're turned into flakes, they rise up in the atmosphere, and then HARP can bounce off of that. But
Well, a lot of people think of this chemtrail story as just fiction. And you're saying, chemtrails are used to create metal barriers in the atmosphere for these antennas?
yes, and anyone who thinks chemtrails don't exist, or they think that you just on a certain day that that the contrail just happens to go across the entire sky, or that the people looking out the window who see there is no contrail or a chemtrail and then instantaneously it turns on, or the ones they film turning on
Right.
in front of the... Okay, I'm sorry, geoengineering has been going on for the longest time. They've been seeding clouds
Well, most people think
all
that's
of my
because
life. I don't understand why people could think that they could deny it and make it go away.
Well,
That's
most people
absolutely
think
silly.
it's based on temperature and evaporation from the jet engine, and that sometimes it's affected by the atmosphere's weather and things like this. That's not what you're talking about, right?
Oh, hi, I just dropped in.
Well, hello.
And I just have to say, we're being sprayed on like we were bugs.
Wow.
They want to kill us.
Wow.
Yeah, it is that simple.
It's that simple. Every time, now, folks, you're out there listening, you look up in the sky, start looking up in the sky. When you see those chemtrails, you're the bug.
Okay,
No.
well, they call them contrails, right? Because they want us to think they're condensation. But-
That's the myth. Here it is. It's aerosol spraying. Aerosol spraying can be water. It can be ash. It can be all kinds of particles. They've been doing this forever. I mean, since planes could do this. Why? There's three things happening. First off, it's to cloud the earth so that the sun doesn't come through because we have too much global warming, which now we have too much global colding. So they put up fake clouds to keep the sun bouncing off of them so it wouldn't heat up the earth. Okay, that's
So
stupid.
somebody in his genius decided that we needed to cool down, so they put all this stuff in the atmosphere, is what you're saying.
And they've been doing it for a long time. And it isn't even the government. It is weather agencies. Many of the radar systems belong to private companies. And the companies that actually spread this are oftentimes private companies, and that they are actually private planes that are cargo planes that are doing it. So there's no humans on many of these. But, anyone who just looks at where the planes are coming across their house from the airport, take a look at it over time and you'll see, no, on certain days, it is completely littered. And on other days, it is not. And I see how you feel with that. Because these heavy metals, some of them sink to the earth and they're simply collected, and this is a proven fact. Others of them create geoengineering. The others go up into the sky, and they go through incredibly awful changes as they go through the stratosphere, the ionosphere, and the different layers around the earth. They turn hot, they turn cold, they become reflective, they become collective. They're ridiculous. These are experiments on us. But we were talking about waves.
Right.
And
you
wanted...
were talking about an antenna that's broadcasting into this environment.
Okay,
right?
let's talk about the ionosphere. Let's talk about the stratosphere or the atmosphere. As the Earth is spinning, as a dynamo, as they say, because it's got a nickel core, which that's a speculation. But anyway, as it's spinning, it's creating what's called the Schumann resonance. And this is a fact, and it's higher, it's about 7.83 at the equator, and it changes as it goes towards the north or south pole. But the point is that it's a certain frequency, 7.83. Well, guess what? The frequency that the human heart emits, if you measure its potential gradient. You knew I was going to say 7.83, didn't you? Oh,
wow.
That's right. And where does that come from? And what is that?
Well, most people don't even understand that our bodies
What
are
is that
vibrating
frequency?
at all.
Right. They don't get that. Each of the nerve plexuses that they call in the East chakras vibrates, and you can put a potential gradient device to actually measure it, but they have these frequencies and they've known them, and they create bells that create those frequencies and the harmonics of those frequencies that relate to these different nerve plexuses, about 7 of them in the body, using the head as the biggest, of course, because that's where the greatest cluster of nerves is, and along the spine. And then they come out into the heart, and they come out into the stomach. There's the solar plexus, and just below the belly button. And
So this is all scientifically known that our body's organs all vibrate at a different frequency?
those nerve plexuses do, yes, and they can be measured.
Okay.
And also brain waves. And so I was going to give you Ormus before we started this, because Ormus, you put it under your tongue.
Ormus sounds like my uncle down in Tennessee.
Good old Ormus. He's out there making some
I was born in
white
Tennessee,
lightning.
so I can say
Hey,
that.
Michael, would you like me to go over and get you a little batch of Ormus in here and let you try a few drops?
Shall we
under your
test you
tongue?
right now?
Well, I trust you guys.
Okay,
fine.
all right. Hey,
24,
it's
32,
we make it here,
40.
and people want to know what our recipe is, and I haven't written it down because it's a little complicated. But if you go and you do YouTubes, you'll find different ways that people are making it. You'll find your way. Everybody finds their way, and so I just put a few drops under my tongue, right there, and just let it sit for a while. Why do we do it under the tongue? I can't talk.
Why under the tongue, sublingual? Because it goes to this. You want it to go to the head. It is the cesium, yttrium, iridium, the white gold, all these different higher metals that are superconductors that are in the brain are in this. It's distilled from salt. This,
And then you can just swallow it.
and then swallow it.
And then have a little chaser.
Okay.
No, not yet. So she made this out of Dead Sea salts because she's an alchemist. You can make it out of different things, but Ormus appears in spring water. It appears everywhere. It appears in grape juice, especially Concord grape juice, so high in it. It's amazing. There's certain things very high concentrated in it, but the point is that there are high level superconducting metals. In other words, frequencies, because a metal
In our bodies.
in this Ormus.
Okay.
And yes, in our bodies too, in our brain. Okay, now you just had some. You swallowed it.
We were on the frequency of the body, right? And so you were explaining how. Well, I asked you about different frequencies of our body. So presumably, there's some interaction between those frequency vibrations in our body and all this electromagnetic frequencies that are these billions that are coming at us all the time. And is it good for us is the question.
The only thing that that science will acknowledge in America is if it burns your skin, and then they try to measure how deep in your skin the electromagnetic frequency.
Well, I can give you
bombardment
one. My
goes.
only example of that is my brother is a videographer in Phoenix, and in South Phoenix, there's this mountain where all of the TV and radio stations have their transmitters. And sometimes my brother had to go up to that mountain to be in those facilities, and they actually had to wear special gear in order not to fry themselves. That's how bad it was there.
Oh yes, especially with high frequency microwave transmitters. That's what we worked with. So I was trying to give you an explanation here of why it is that I would know these things, or how I have any authority to speak on a way that it could work. I was giving you the example of Ormus. Ormus has been used to work with ADD children, ADHD children, Down syndrome children. They put it in their tongue, and in about 2 minutes, they're measuring their brain waves, and they have gamma waves, which connects all the other waves. And for about anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours, they seem to be able to think really, really clearly. I experimented on this with children, and because Betsy is such a good alchemist, she makes it. But then she said to me, how can we get this frequency into the classroom to be able to help children attain the right brain wave, because they're in an atmosphere of good frequency instead of the electrosmog of electromagnetic frequencies from radio towers, from every television station.
So that's a good description. Electrosmog.
Yeah.
We're all swimming in electrosmog.
And it's going to get much worse with 5G, yes.
And 5G creates a whole nother round of frequencies that we have to deal with.
Higher frequencies.
Higher frequencies.
Beyond microwave.
Could you explain that for a minute? Because a lot of people don't understand frequencies that well, and about the spectrum and the way the government licenses this spectrum and how valuable it is in the economy, and how it goes from low to high.
Well, yeah, so let's look at what we were trying to attain with, if you want to change your brain waves to be at the highest frequency, that is a particular harmonic, which is the frequency of brain waves called gamma brain waves. That's higher than alpha, beta, theta, delta, but it also coheres the other ones. And so how is it
cohere?
That means makes them all beautifully balanced, and then they all actually activate. So it's an odd thing and it's almost very difficult to attain, that your brain would go into this particular brain wave, which is 60 hertz. Now, you can go down to, 2 hertz, 4 hertz. Those will put you to sleep. If you take a gigantic frequency generator and you give off an extremely low frequency of, say, 4 hertz or 6 hertz,
right,
and you aim it at someone,
right,
they're going to go to sleep. If you aim it,
Wow.
if it's even lower, they may die if they have a heart problem.
Wow.
So frequencies affect people. So the HARP array was to get to extremely low frequencies so that they could communicate, supposedly, to submarines under the ice in the north.
Right, that's the one
and
I've
blah,
heard
blah,
of.
blah.
Right.
Well, yes, it goes deep into the earth. It penetrates it. It makes the animals go crazy. It messes up their migration patterns. They have magnetic crystals in their head, and these kind of waves are so powerful they can kill. So,
isn't it true that they're also somehow used in weather warfare?
Yes, they're used in warfare. In Iraq, they were called poppers, and they put the poppers on the buildings. Any bit where they had to keep patrolling certain areas, they'd patrol it and then they'd come back. So they put the poppers in the building, and so before they'd patrol the next time, they'd turn all the poppers on, and the poppers would send out a frequency that would make you think your brain was on fire and you'd run away.
Ugh.
And they'd turn that on and put this microwave electro smog into an area before they'd send the troops in.
So they're actually using it as a weapon.
Oh, yes. And then on the Humvees, they had what looked like, big dish antennas, which they can emit all kinds of frequencies. They've demonstrated this in America again and again. They think they're very proud of this. They put out 200 people in a field, young, old, whatever, and they hit a certain frequency, and the young ones drop to the ground and go to sleep, but everybody else is fine. They hit another frequency, and the teenagers think their brain's on fire, and they run away. You hit another frequency, and all the old people think their skin is on fire.
Wow.
The other ones aren't affected. They have perfected exactly what frequency does what. Now,
And so presumably these aren't the frequencies that our radios are using, TVs are using, or are they?
no.
Okay.
No, these are really low and really high frequencies, and also binaural frequencies in some cases, where they're sending it from 2 different directions, and the frequency they're creating is the
So
basic.
it's the conjunction.
Correct.
The conjunction of the two.
Add the 2, divide it in half, that's what you get. So generally, it was always believed that you could not project a brain wave at a human, but I had the good fortune to study for a bit with Peter Kelly, who kind of inherited the what is called the radionics laboratory of the Delaware Institute, which was in England, and they created a lot of devices. These are radionics devices. So it still takes a psychic in the circuit to make it work, but the circuit then can tell you what frequency is the frequency of lung cancer, and what frequency will make someone who has lung cancer feel better. Or the frequency of, say, mullein, the herb, because that helps cancer go away. And so they put that frequency in this generator, and they take a picture of the person and put it over here on this pad, and the person in the middle, that is like the psychic, has to operate this device, and then they send that frequency to that person. It doesn't matter where on earth they are, because if they have a picture and or if they have their full name and birth date and where they were located, there's a signature for each human being. And that signature is a specific group of frequencies called heterodyned frequencies. So you have many frequencies, but they would be 100%, they'd be different. There's no human has the same exact constellation of frequencies in their chakras, their body, the way they relate to different substances, and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, you introduced the idea of a psychic. Well, to me, most of the time when I hear the word psychic, I think of some kook. So clearly, knowing you're not a kook, that's not what you're talking about. So what is this kind of psychic you're talking about?
Well, in parapsychology, they have studies that can demonstrate if someone's psychic. And they usually use crystals. Single crystals, single terminated crystals, not double twinning crystals. And they simply put the psychic in this room. They go into a sensitive stage. They go spin the crystal in that room. If it's pointing it north, and every 15, 20 seconds, they spin the crystal. They write down what direction the psychic says it was pointing north, it was pointing south, it was pointing. Why is it that when they're in the trance, you can feel a crystal in the direction that it's pointing, the energy that's coming out of that termination of the crystal? Because crystals are everywhere. The frequency of silica crystal is in everything that is erect.
So you're saying these people are somehow more attuned to certain issues related to frequency in our bodies than others are? Is that why they're called psychics?
That would be true. That would be one of the gifts of some psychics, yes, that they would be sensitive to these kind of things, yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. So these are people that are somehow more sensitive to certain types of thoughts and feelings and actions than the rest of us are. They're not superhuman, right?
No. Matter of fact, they're a leftover from the past. In the ancient past, the clairvoyants all agreed on what they saw. That's the reason religions all say the same thing, and they all say that saw the same angels. They described the spiritual world the same way. It was all, no matter what tradition you want to look in, it doesn't matter. In ancient times, say before 2000 BC, let's say, people were much more clairvoyant. And as they came into the age of the Greek times, remember, the ancient Greeks believed that they saw the gods in those temples. And then later, they said, of course, they knew the gods really weren't there. And they had to give them a new type of belief, which was through drama, for instance, or through other types of initiation like the Eleusinian mysteries. So there are different mysteries that were taught at that time. So the clairvoyants, remember, in the Greek time, they weren't so clairvoyant at the end, so what did they depend upon? The Sibyls. They would have to go to an oracle.
Okay, so it's people who are more sensitive to the unseen world than others are.
Yes.
Okay, so back to antennas. So you're saying that these frequencies we have in our bodies can be measured, they can be determined, they can be somehow focused, and how are those affected by all these electromagnetic waves that are hitting us, these billions of waves that are hitting us today, now?
Well, first off, they're affected by the sun and the 6 planets. So you have a 7-fold effect. In almost anything, from the growth and development of insects to the colors in the rainbow to the way the atomic chart is set out, it's all in 7s. And so in the human body, you have not only the 7 chakras, but you have the 7 chambers of the heart. Most people don't know there's 7 chambers. That's another talk on another day. There's the 7 chambers of your heart, and then your lung, your kidneys, your liver, your gallbladder, your, what did I miss? Your heart, your, one other one.
I don't know.
Anyway, 7 of them. There's 6 organs under your chest, around the heart, isn't there? And then there's 7 chakras.
Actually, I never counted them.
Yeah, and then there's 7, well, major organs. And then there's 7 chakras. And then there's 7 chambers in your head. We know of the 5 ventricles. There's, if you look at it properly, there's actually 7. What are those? Those are the planets. The planets have their own frequency. If we were not bombarded by EMF all the time, we would feel those frequencies, and they would bring us into harmonic resonance with the very forces in nature that are creating healthy frequencies. Now,
So you're
the frequency
saying
of
the man-made frequencies are drowning them out.
Yes, because they're so monotonous, they're so dry, and they aren't the right harmonics, and they are actually, they take away life instead of giving life. Without silica, nothing would grow upward. The trees are all standing upright because of silica. We stand upright because of the silica that was in our bones, later replaced by calcium. But basically, everything erect is from silica. It goes at the frequency of 32,768 vibrations per second. That's the reason they're used for watches, because that frequency is so exact. Well, that frequency is like Ormus.
So where does that fall in the frequency spectrum between low frequency and microwave?
In the middle.
In the middle, okay.
But there's harmonics. So no matter how you want to look at this, you can bring that down to a harmonic of usually a single digit. But that's getting a little bit deep here. But what we're talking about is resonance.
So when you say harmonics, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
But you were going to also say something about Ormus. He's got to finish this thought about the Ormus.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, Ormus is a superconductor, you see. And so what we're talking about is silica is also a superconductor because it has piezoelectric energy.
Okay.
Silica, when it's crystallized, is emanating energy. Ormus, in its natural state, emanates energy and becomes a superconductor. But it doesn't even come near the other substances. Just by being near them, it has morphic resonance. Same thing happens with enzymes in the human body.
Morphic. What's the adjective?
It's the shape.
Okay.
So if we're talking about waves, we're talking about how long that wave is in the crest, the crest of the, from the top to the bottom, in a transverse wave. But once you have a complete pervasive field of 32,768 frequency, everywhere in nature where there is anything standing up, in other words,
so all of nature out there in the woods, out there, is all vibrating at that same frequency?
in the silica,
The
that is
silica
in it.
frequency?
Yes.
Got
Well, the silica in those substances,
substances.
which, like, say, in the crust of the earth, it's like 75%. In plants, it's usually 75%. Some plants are 90%. Human body, over 90% when you're born. It goes down to like 27%. The reason you die is because calcium comes in and takes over for silica. So the reason that we were able to develop the cube is because it's built upon that frequency. That frequency creates a scalar wave, a standing wave, a wave that defies time because it creates a continuum. You see, the same thing happens with light. They've now, and Rudolf Steiner said, that light would be accelerated faster than what we see is the frontal movement of light. So the standard speed of light in a laser has now been exceeded 10 times that. He predicted that would happen. In a continuum, light can travel at an infinite speed, in fact.
In a continuum?
In a continuum.
What's a continuum?
When you turn on a light and it goes from here and then it's there,
Right.
That's the continuum.
Okay.
And in between there, it doesn't move at the speed of light. It moves infinitely. And they're now finding this out because the new way that they're going to do all internet communication is through the lights in your house. Because light itself can absorb so much information and give out so much information that it's going to be the new source of communication, and we'll simply go through.
It'll replace Wi-Fi and
we'll simply
5G or anything.
We'll simply go through our landlines, through normal electromagnetic landlines, right? But we'll do it through light. Every light in your house will be connected to your computer.
So in other words, they were doing a lot of development around Wi-Fi run through your copper in your house about 10 years ago. It was the big rage, and now you don't hear anything about it. Is that because they've developed it and now they're in the implementation phase?
Most modems for most cable companies are already projecting 5G. Most of them run at a 2.5 microwave speed, gigahertz, 2.5 gigahertz, but they already have the capacity to run 5G, so they can run 5 gigahertz. This is standard, especially in a big house. They'll put in a modem that has both, and then they'll let the house computer decide which one they want to link to. So it's already in houses. Mm-hmm. And so this projection that is happening is going to be that they're going to add 300,000 new cell towers. But mind you, these cell towers are as big as a pizza box because the waves they're emitting are so small. They're beyond
microwave?
They're beyond microwave.
They're smaller than microwave.
They're called millimeter wave.
Okay.
I call them milliwaves, like microwave milliwaves. But they're millimeter waves, and they go up to 200 gigahertz.
So wait a second. Doesn't that fry your brain? Isn't it
Yes,
like
it
being
does.
in a microwave?
Yes, it does. No, because it is not a focused
Okay, so it's not a closed container.
It is diffuse.
Okay.
It's projecting all over the place. Plus, in your house, you're going to have modems projecting it too, so you're going to just be bathed in 5G. Yes.
Wow.
But now, going back to what I did in the military, we invented collapsed array antennas because we were experimenting. But
So collapsed array, what does that mean?
that means if you take all those wires that you saw hanging there,
Right,
like
right.
on a sheets on
So
a
you
line,
basically weave them back and
clothesline.
forth?
Yeah, take all of those and just weave them back and forth
Got
in
it.
one line from the tip to the toe of a plane, 200 times,
Okay.
and now you cover every type
So
of
in
wave.
effect, it's 200 times longer than that.
Correct.
If you were to string it out.
Yes, but they never thought you could let the.
But don't they do that with our phones now?
Yes, they do, and
Okay.
they also do it on most cars. Those little fins on the top,
Right.
that's a collapsed array
They're
antenna.
there's woven inside.
Yes. So we have a collapsed array antenna inside of the cube, but it is an exact. It has to be created exactly. And I took my work with Peter Kelly and the Delaware Institute Radionics Devices, and I looked at the way they had created sensitive devices that could send out these frequencies, very subtle frequencies that these machines create, and a human has to be in the circuit to make it work. And I saw that this worked. It worked in agriculture
Hang
particularly
on, what do
well.
you mean when you said a human has to be in there to make it work?
Yeah, these devices are radionics devices. They're a consciousness device, and you have to have a psychic involved.
So what do? Plug this person in?
No, they sit there and they stroke a little pad. And when they know that it's a yes answer, the pad snaps and their finger sticks on it.
Well, are there that many psychics around? It seems
Very
like
few.
I was gonna say.
When I met Peter Kelly, he was so happy to meet me because I could work his machines. And there were machines that he had never actually seen work before because
So that's
there
a
are
bit
so
of
few
a
people
problem
that
with
make work.
scalability, then I would say.
Well, that's the reason he had a museum of all of them, and they weren't out there anymore. But Bill Nelson invented one called the Skio machine and the Indigo and the Eductor. And so there are biofeedback machines that do this where you can send these vibrations out. But there are machines, that little machine right over there on the other side, is sending out a Qigong master's Qi expression again and again as a frequency. You can't even hear
What
it.
does that mean? It's a certain frequency?
Yes.
Okay. That somebody measured from this Chi master
Yes, and it sounds like
while he's thinking or something?
yeah, he actually sitting there and he emits the chi and it goes.
Huh.
Same thing happens when you stroke the pad. It'll go, and it'll tell you that means yes. Now in those were antennas. Hear that sound?
Oh, yeah.
That's the frequency emitted by a qigong master from his chakra, his chi chakra.
What does that mean? Chi
It-
chakra.
It means it's at a certain frequency,
Okay.
a lower frequency than the heart.
Okay. So somebody measured that
Yes.
and then duplicated it in that device.
Actually, they had a qigong master imprinted probably into diatomaceous clay, more than likely.
What does that mean?
It's a sensitive substance that can measure frequencies. You can put a potential gradient reader into diatomaceous clay. You can stick anything, and you know its
I
frequency.
know the diatomaceous clay because we used it to get rid of fleas once when a dog got fleas.
Yes, it's like Sungite. It's a wonderful conductor of vibrations, especially subtle
okay.
vibrations.
Okay. So it's matter that you are now using as the distribution of that frequency.
Yes. So after working with these devices, I figured out these devices say they can go through space and time. And I've seen it demonstrated.
What? They can go through space and time.
Yes.
What does that mean?
You can treat someone at a distance in subspace, and you can go back and forward in time and take pictures. And those have
Whoa.
been demonstrated to be real.
You just blew my mind. Okay. Can I step back?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. So
Yeah, this is where it does get a bit dicey.
okay. So let me go
If
back
you're new
to
to the American intelligence
let
media and you find this a little disturbing, just
Click off.
Click off. Okay. But for the rest of you who
so
want to go way out in the weeds, let's do it.
the engineer in me would like to ask engineering questions. Okay. So you go back to this antenna you've got that's matching the silica wave. I got that. Okay, of everything out there in the nature, right? And your antenna has matched that wave, right?
By using silica itself.
So it's not a string of copper. It's
No, it's a self-generating antenna. receiving and broadcasting antenna.
Okay, so
That
and
replicates-
how long is it?
It
You
doesn't
know-
matter. It's infinitely long and
Yes.
as short as imaginable because the way the antenna is constructed.
Okay, so it's constructed. Is it like fiber optics?
No.
See, you.
It's one circuit.
You're an engineer, and you work in
Yeah.
a three-dimensional world, and
Yes.
you work in time, and you work in space.
I kinda do, yes.
And now we take you outside of that because
Okay.
when we started this work, we realized that we would need to protect ourselves energetically, and we would also need to help others protect themselves. So this is why we developed the cube.
She forced me to make
Forced,
it. Betsy
yes.
forced
Okay,
me to make it. I did
you
not want to
figured
make
out
it.
a different way other than stringing wire to get to that frequency, is what you're telling me.
Yes, through
Okay.
plate antennas
Through plate antenna. So
and
you,
through geometric antennas.
okay, so somehow you figured out how to get that length to get the right frequency. That's your magic. That's your
Correct.
secret sauce.
It is the exact ratio of everything involved. You nailed it on the head.
Okay.
You are an engineer. And if you change one tiny speck of it, it won't work as well.
Got it. So you had to calibrate that somehow.
Yes.
You did that in a laboratory,
Well,
presumably.
yes,
Correct.
because at that point,
Okay.
after we did the design, we realized, okay, now we have to have somebody who can engineer it. So Betsy
Right.
got on the phone. Of course, I was using my other name, but to find an engineer that would design this for us because I had to have precision cuts.
Right.
And when they
So
they
when you
would
say
ask-
cut, excuse me, when you say cuts, are these slices of a material?
Yes.
you know,
So you're taking some material. Is it geometric in shape or is it just random shapes?
Random. No, it's geometric.
This is
and
like
it's wire.
slicing off silica, very thinly
just
sliced.
all kinds of things
Metals.
within it
Metals, okay.
needed to be precisely cut.
Is it like a diamond cutter?
No.
No?
And so
Precision cutting. Automotive engineers did this for us.
Okay.
All right. So now, hear me out. One of the magical things about the cube is that when you are cleared of all this electromagnetic smog, you can begin to hear the voices, the higher voice of yourself.
Okay, so
And-
that's a benefit of the
Yes,
cube.
but if you keep interrupting me, I'm
Sorry.
going to come over there and strangle you.
That's
Okay.
okay. I'm sorry.
All right.
You don't mess with Betsy.
Don't mess with Betsy.
Okay, let her finish,
Okay,
and then
no,
I'll
no,
ask
water.
questions. Let me
All
let me write down these questions,
Okay,
and I'll
all right.
save them to the end.
I have to say this all in a big breath because it's so hard to get out. Okay, so one of the magical things about being in the radiance of the cube is it clears this smog, so to speak, and now you can connect to your higher self and you can connect to your angels because you've cleared this pathway. And so when you walk into this resonance, you find yourself aligned in this. For many people who would come in the presence of it, they would have answers to questions. And so they began to call our living room the answer room because every time they came in there, they had a clarity. When people walk in our space and even any place that we treat, they notice, and perhaps you have, there seems to be a clarity in the air. There's something here that is not where you are. And so that's what it does. It clears that out. But we said we need somebody to do this design precisely. So we had a prototype. And I turned to Thomas and I said, well, we'll see if it works. If this works, they're going to find me an engineer who doesn't think I'm nuts, right?
And she said, prove it. If this is true, and if your prototype works, come bring your lazy butt right over here right now. Put your hand on this cube and demand that the cube brings us an engineer.
Right. Now, so that's what we did.
That's what happened.
So we said that. Okay, now it wasn't 2 hours later. It was
minutes, I thought.
Paul called. We'll just use your name, Paul. Paul, you can make your comments in the box below. He called and he's just chatting me up. He hadn't seen me in a while, and we're kind of weird in this way about frequency, vibration, and energy. And
Yeah, it can get soundy.
yeah, I know it can be out there, but hey, it's works.
Pretty out there. No, I'm listening.
So we hadn't talked in a couple of years, and he was just calling me out of the blue. I didn't really know what his profession was. I just knew him from this other activity we were doing. And so he said, well, I just felt, I should call you and see what you're up to. And I said, well, I have a blah, blah. I need an engineer. Do you know any engineers that would help me on this problem? And he goes, oh, I'm an engineer. And I went, oh my gosh. And you get it because you sat in class with me.
Biogeometry.
Yes, and to figure all this out. So then I told him about the cube. And he said he would love to help us. So now he's an engineer, but he also knows how to work in this other dimension.
Do you know what kind of engineer he is?
Electrical,
Mechanical,
He's
chemical,
mechanical,
I don't
probably.
know.
Mechanical,
He's
chemical.
mechanical.
We'll call him.
He works in the auto industry. He does all kinds of
But look,
stuff.
people want to hear results. So anyway, so we didn't hear from Paul for a while. Finally, get a call from him. He said he had everything ready to go for us, and it's the internal components he was doing. There are several components. So he was doing a key part of the component. And we met, and he's sitting across the table from us, and it's like he didn't want to give it to us. You know, it was bought and paid for, and I'm waiting for it. And he said, "What are you going to do with this thing?" He said, "It's the most powerful device of its kind I've ever measured."
And he works in this field.
Yes, he works in this field. So we
Subtle
knew,
energy.
wow, this is great.
And what kind of energy?
Subtle energy.
Okay.
Like for cars, they vibrate apart if you can't use pendulums in a Faraday
Oh
room
yeah.
to be,
A
very
lot-
serious stuff.
Vibration is a big issue in automotive field.
That's what it's
But
all
this
about.
is at it's a much higher
Sure,
dimension.
I got that.
So anyway, we brought it. We knew people would want one, but we also realized from our work is that you can take a 3 or 4 dimensional object or being, and you can create a resonance that it's in a lower dimension. So we could take this 3-dimensional cube, and we could imprint or have the vibration of that also resonate in a 2-dimensional form. And that's when we came up with the antenna that are called the sigil. And I'll stop
Can
there.
I stop you?
Okay.
You just
Okay,
you
she
just-
took
you
us
just-
further out in
you
the
just
woods than
blew
I
my
ever
mind.
have, and I'll see if we can get us back.
Yeah, no,
Good work.
Yeah.
For
thanks.
once,
You just
Betsy
blew
went
my
so
mind.
far out there, but I agree with
Yeah.
every word she said.
Okay, when you went to the 4th dimension, you blew my mind.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
so can I pull it back to 3, and then maybe you can help me get to the 4th?
All right, we'll try.
Okay, so you had back to the what was the spec you gave to the engineer? You said, I want to build a silica antenna using your skills, and I would put it in this cube. Is there any reason why it's a cube and not a sphere or any other shape?
Sorry, Paul, but Paul had nothing to do with the design. That was my design.
Okay, so cube is just
Every
a
aspect.
useful,
No, wait.
useful
no,
descriptor.
it was Betsy in my design. I'm
Yes,
so
you
sorry.
were. I
So
tell you what.
She did the mathematical calculations that I could not do on it.
Okay, so does it have to be a cube, or could it be any shape?
It must be a cube. And look at the Bell Laboratories new cube antenna. They say they're going to replace every single cell phone repeater antenna with the same exact size antenna that we created at the exact same time.
So what
Bell
you're saying
Laboratories
is that
cube antenna.
there's 3 dimensions to this antenna, and all dimensions have to be calibrated exactly the same way on all 6 sides. Is that what you're saying? That's why it has to be a cube. It has to be the same shape.
That is true.
Okay, so the components inside then are all similar in the way they line the sides of the cube.
It is basically one circuit. It is one
I got that.
thing. But we have put many things in it
Right.
that I can't even explain to you. It would take hours to explain the subtle energies that have been heterodyned and put into this circuit system.
So is it like when you talk about the silica, is it like mica where there's lots of little layers all stuffed, jammed together, and together they're all one contiguous piece? Is that what you're saying?
I will state to you, since the boss has left the room, I will state that there is silica in it, and it's the same exact thing that is going on in a quartz watch.
Okay,
It is silica that is being put under a certain type of vice pressure so that it can release more and more energy consistently,
Really?
so it becomes, in fact, a generator.
So you actually put the silica under pressure in the cube permanently.
Correct.
Oh, so that's where the energy's coming from.
One of the places.
Okay.
But the way that we've mixed this is I used everything that I knew from radionics. I used everything I knew from being in the military. And then I had studied Tesla and come across some amazing Tesla documents where I was looking at the antennas. And so I was doing experiments. We also did it because I'd remembered this when I was in the military after we created the collapsed array antenna, and we used it successfully in the military. And I was working with microwave and microwave transmissions, diffuse microwave, focused microwaves. I was literally, working, sending stuff, microwaving it all the way back to the president's office.
So these microwave devices were just dishes that they just did line of sight broadcasts all the way back to the president?
That is correct.
In different repeaters all the way back?
That is, in those days, that is correct.
Okay.
And out of that, we discovered some very interesting things, that any diaphanous surface with a very low frequency and just the base carrier frequency of a microwave can be used as an eavesdropping device, for instance. And now when you go to the spy shops, that's what they'll sell you. Anywhere you can see a direct eyesight connection to a window,
Yes.
you can hear everything in the house.
Oh, when I was working in the Soviet Union, they were complaining about the listening devices just bouncing off of the glass in their rooms and them having recorded.
I developed a thing where we can use any cord. Any cord in a room is an antenna.
Right.
Once I can figure out how it is creating static on a carrier wave that might be coming in or out of that room, or in any projection
When you
into
say
the
carrier
out of that room.
wave, what do you mean?
The base frequency generation that you build everything else on. So you build it up on 60 hertz. So you build it on 32 megahertz or whatever, and then on top of that, voice is another whole thing. So have very, very fast frequency, and then there's your voice is a very
So the carrier
slow frequency.
wave is the wave in which it's like a pipe, and inside that pipe they can have a lot of different waves for voice and data and different types of transmissions, all carried within that main carrier wave.
Yes, which is bombarding you over and over and over again with the same frequency. Yes.
So the carrier wave is one frequency carrying other frequencies
Yes.
inside it.
And those other ones are called heterodyned. So anytime you have multiple frequencies carrying on a carrier wave. So when I said that you have 7 billion, well, some of those have, the reason it's 7 billion is one particular wave may be carrying 100 million conversations.
Right,
You don't
okay.
know. I mean, it depends on how
Right.
big that transponder is.
Okay, so you got to break that down. So one carrier wave may do 500 million.
Yes. So when you figure out the carrier wave that is nature's carrier wave, the frequency of quartz crystal,
Quartz, right?
the frequency of life, the frequency of
Wow.
levity.
Wow.
Once you realize that that's everywhere and that it's always communicating with each
So
other.
are these trees communicating with us now?
Well, of course they are.
Are they actually transmitting
Yes.
a wave to
Yes,
us?
Of course.
Wow.
Everything, it doesn't even have to be alive. A rock, if it's a crystal, it's a higher frequency. But if it's just a plain rock, it has a lower frequency. Everything emits a potential gradient frequency, a quantum signature.
Does the federal, I mean, this is kind of a humorous question. Does the federal government sell that bandwidth? Does it license that bandwidth?
They don't know about it.
Really?
No.
So that's not part of the spectrum that they licensed through the FCC?
No. It's just like, 440A is not supposed to be 440A, but all of our music is based upon a false musical scale. Does anybody want to talk about that it's supposed to be 432, not 440? And then you must adjust all the other frequencies in even our music. Our music is set to be disharmonious. It's dissonance. We are being bombarded with dissonance.
Well,
if you go to
you lost me
harmonics,
there. I'm a musician.
Yes.
I play scales. What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
When you say it's disharmonic, I mean, when I play a symphony plays, it's not disharmonic, it's harmonic.
We've trained our ears to believe so. How about doesn't a piano play during a symphony?
Sometime.
What's it called? A well-tuned clavichord. There's not a single note on it that's perfect. Every note is out of tune. Not only that, but the scales.
You can measure the frequency.
Well, of course you can. But my point is, we are using Lydian, the Jupiter signature. That there were 7 scales from the Greek times, from the Greek mysteries.
Right. I mean, our scale is
It's the scale of Jupiter, but
there are different scales for different times. I mean,
exactly.
Right.
And so supposedly, cultural signatures are based upon these frequencies, which are in fact musical scales. How many intervals is what it's all about?